to start with is we're going to look at a company called Evergrande. And you think, oh, what's Evergrande got to do with anything? Who are they? Well, basically, Evergrande are a property company in China. And you think, okay, this is a strategy call. What's property got to do with this? Believe me, when you see the story unfold, you'll realize. So Evergrande is the largest property company in China. $300 billion is basically their turnover, basically. And they basically have control. Well, their turnover is basically about 30% of China's gross domestic product. In other words, 30% of China's turnover is this property company. Now, guess what? In December, they defaulted. So let's sort of do a fast forward on this story. So in China, the people over there will not buy secondhand property because they reckon that if you buy a secondhand property, then the bad luck of the person who had the property before is what ends up when you buy the property. So what they do is they buy property off plan. In other words, with no windows, no doors, no electrics, no nothing, just an empty shell, with a view to selling it later on. So what happens? Loads and loads of people in China decided to buy a property as an investment. Look, everybody wants to invest. You know, we're not giving financial advice here, but all of our lives is based on things like investments. So when you look at this, the Chinese people are thinking, well, this is the best investment I can think of. Buy property and later on sell it off when it goes up. So what happens? Lots of people buy properties. The builder keeps building. And when they've sold, they then find out there's a massive shortage because people are still looking for property. And they'll buy 4 or 5 of them. And then the price will go up and then they'll buy another 4 or 5 of them. And hence, you know, that's where the ball starts rolling. So eventually, guess what happens? If you've got nobody to sell to, then you got a problem. So then the company defaults and they can't pay their debts. And that's $300 billion. That's massive. When we got told in the 2008 crash, Lehman Brothers was huge. Believe me, Lehman Brothers was peanuts compared to this. Lehman Brothers was a peanut compared to Evergrande. Just imagine a country losing 30% of its gross domestic product. So this is Evergrande. So the creditors are saying threat over action of default. This is a newer one that says debt disaster. Evergrande suppliers release explosive joint letter. They're basically, all the customers are saying, you haven't built our property and we paid you for it. On the other hand, Evergrande can't build the properties because they don't have the funds coming in. So it's a catch-22, they're stuck. But here's the thing, where does Evergrande go? Don't forget, what happens is, how do these companies raise funds? They raise funds by issuing a bond. This is where you come in. Because when a bond is issued, do you know who puts money into the bond? Your pension fund. Big companies, big corporations, and pension funds put money into bonds that these companies issue. Bond is like a loan. So all these companies talk to each other and they go, wow, Evergrande's doing amazingly. They're issuing bonds and they're paying 5%. And the current rate is 0.25%. And they're going, wow, this is great. Let's buy up a load of bonds in Evergrande, which is basically, they borrowed the money and they're paying 5% on it. But guess what? What happens when this goes into default? Those bonds are worth nothing. And that's a major, major problem. Because if you look at the next page, it says, why are people across China refusing to pay their mortgages on the property they bought? Now just think, there are millions of people across China who refuse to pay their properties. And this is dated the 15th of July. So it's not a few months old. This is literally a few days old. So if these people are not paying their property, their mortgages, then you think, what's the next step? Because the company's in default, they can't pay their debts, they can't build the properties. The investors have lost their money because they've paid out for a mortgage for a property that in effect doesn't exist. And that means that China's economy is going to go into a major decline. But also, when you get big companies like Evergrande, they will basically invest in properties all over the world, New York, London, etc. So all these properties that they bought are now they're going to have to sell off at probably a loss because they need to shift them quick. That then brings in a decline in the housing market across the world. So you know, when we go to that, oh, what's it got to do with me? Believe me, it has a massive amount to do with you, because it's not just going to affect the property market here, but it's going to property market all around the world. It affects pensions. And just think, when companies like Hyperpay and Hypernation, they work in a very similar sort of way. You know, they work on liabilities, etc. So when the world is in a decline like this, then you think, okay, this is a much, much bigger problem than we think it is. So here, global investors on edge as China faces a $9.2 trillion flashpoint. That means that China could go into a deep depression or recession, because 9.2 trillion is way more zeros than I know what to do with. And that affects every single one of us. So, you know, this is where, when we look at Hyperverse and then go, oh, you know, this has happened and so this guy did this and this guy did that. Well, guess what? It's not just that. That's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is what's happening in the world. And see, unless we don't look at what's happening in the world, we don't realize where the problems actually are. We just blame that one entity that we know, which is fine too, but we should now sort of look a bit further, look a bit deeper, and look at what else is going on in the world. So, I mean, if this, well, this is not even an if, this is dated July the 16th. So this is 2 days old. So now we know there is a major, major problem coming. Evergrande among 6 Chinese development companies which have been booted from the Hang Seng Index, which is similar to the New York Stock Exchange in China, but this in Hong Kong, sorry. And they've actually been booted from there. So that don't look too great. And this is dated July the 16th as well. So this is all fresh news. So you think, well, wow, if that happens, the knock-on effect, how did Lehman Brothers affect the world? It affected in a massive way. It wasn't just in the USA, it affected every single country in the world. And guess what? This is 10 to 15 times bigger than Lehman Brothers. So now you know, and this is not just me saying, oh, let's spread a load of doom and gloom to make you feel better about what's happening in Hyperverse or Hypernation. That's not even close. I think we should be informed. We should understand and realize what else is going on, so you can make better choices based on the knowledge that we have. So, you know, this is where these kinds of things all affect everything that we do. So when you look at, in Hyperverse, we talked about Blockchain Global. That was a hedge fund, a crypto-based hedge fund. So the crypto market, some cryptos are down 90%. And hedge funds generally across the board are down 50%. And then you've got things like Evergrande. Do we know whether Blockchain Global had even invested in them? We don't know. But the point is, everything in the world is connected in one way or another. I'll tell you how connected it is. 96% of the media in the world is owned by 6 companies. That means even the information you receive is only sent out by 6 companies. So you think when you watch CNN or you watch Fox News or you watch anything else, you're getting something different. You're not. You're actually getting the same story, just told a different way. So I thought I would just give you an idea of what this is really all about. From there, let's have a look at moving from Hyperverse to Hypernation. This is important to all of us. But don't forget, this is, again, a part of the whole bigger story, which is, okay, what do we do now? So I've just put down somebody called John, who's in Hyperverse. He's got a team. He's got various teams underneath him. Rewards are coming in. Everything's as good as it can be. We all know about issues with withdrawals, etc., etc. Let's not beat about the same bush over and over again. At the moment, they're being offered a move over to Hypernation. So if you look, John has opted for, let's call it the purple box. So this NFT is now purple. And he's decided, so all of his team has moved across. But guess what? Only the names have moved across. No rewards have moved. No assets. Literally nothing has moved across. Only the names. That's all that's moved. So he's got a notebook full of names. But guess what? If this one here decides they don't want to open a yellow box, then this team or this person will not show up in John's team. So although he's got, say, 6 people here, if only one of them opens a yellow box, all he sees is one yellow box. That's it. So again, there's no guarantee that just because he's bought the purple box and moved all these people across, he's going to gain massively and he's getting some special benefit. Actually, it's the opposite. So let's now think, well, okay, what if he decides to buy the yellow box? So now there's John and there's nobody else. So let's just quickly delete these. So they're all gone. So that's just John on his own, sitting in this section here. But what's also happening is these people have still opened yellow boxes. So they've not disappeared anywhere. They haven't gone. They're still there. They're just not connected. So what's happened is that person is there, but that connection is not. So same with this one. So if we go back one, actually I did that back to front. Let's do these, put them all back. And what's happened is they're all there, sitting in this terminal. All that's changed is the connections have disappeared. So those connections are now not there. Because guess what? Your directs are your directs and you still talk to them. If you're a good leader or if you're a good person, then you still keep in touch with them. And they're still there, just unconnected to anyone. Now, what will happen is once everything's transitioned over, then so far, what the indications are that there will be a link. So John will get a link. So he will be able to connect back up. And memberships will be available. So guess what? I mean, which company is going to turn around and say, we don't want you to build a team. We just want you to sit there and do nothing. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. So this is what they're looking at is, so when somebody buys a purple box, they don't gain anything in monetary value. Yes, there's a commission as a one-off. Just for introducing someone, you get a one-off commission. That's it. Their team doesn't move over. So if you've somebody got called Charlie who's in team over here on the next page, then they don't transition over just because John gave them a link. They stay where they are. Because can you imagine having to move teams around left, right, and center while people are buying purple boxes and platinum boxes? It's a major headache. It's even more of a headache than sorting out the withdrawals and the multiple accounts. So I think that's one of the things that people really need to get their head around. And so guess what? You buy a yellow box, you move over, and you're still going to be knowing the people that join you in the first place. And the ones that do transition over, they've got the yellow box, and eventually you can link back up with them and say, right, okay, let's go and be on our merry way and go and do something. Now, here's the thing. This system was built on instant connections. This system over here, which is Hyphenation, is built more on the basis of something very similar to what I would call an influencer. So if John here is an influencer and he says the right things and does the right calls and talks to his team, etc., looks after them, they'll follow him anyway. And that's that's the beauty of that side of it. So in a way, it's quite good. But there's also lots of people who will be in this side of the terminal building thinking, well, my leaders have disappeared. Who do I join? And they're going to find good people to follow. So you might only have a yellow box, and I wouldn't even say only. You might have a yellow box, but you might suddenly have the biggest team ever, just because you've helped people along the way and you know how this works and you've utilized this program. This side is more about building communities. This side is all about rewards. And that's the difference. This side, when you build a community, let's just take an example. I decide that I want to buy a planet. And because I bought a purple box and a few other purple box holders might get together and say, right, okay, we can afford it. Let's put the money together and we'll buy a planet. Now, suddenly we've got, I don't know, let's say 5,000 people following us. We can take the land, separate it down and say, right, everybody can have 1 acre each. And we could either charge them a really nominal fee, something ridiculous, like $5 or something, and sell the land, because here's the advantage to us. Number one, yeah, we'll make a few dollars out of the $5, which is peanuts. But what it brings is a massive following of people who are going to build this whole infrastructure and these virtual lands. And Bernie sent me something the other day, and there was some company who literally had written a check for $2 million for land, virtual land. I know most of us think that's crazy. Why would you pay for something that in our mind doesn't exist? But then guess what? When you go and speak to somebody about cryptocurrency, they go, don't be daft, it doesn't exist. Well, you know it does. So this is just a next generation of that. But then we can actually help each other to build out whole communities and all sorts of things. And as a team, imagine what happens when you've built this huge planet of entrepreneurs. Suddenly that has a massive attraction, because companies and organizations will want in on it. That's why, look at this. Christie's, the auction house, launches a venture fund aimed at Web3 and blockchain investments. They're an auction house. They sell pieces of art. Even they know where the future is. So they're thinking way ahead of the curve. They're not joining some scheme thinking, oh, this will make us a few quid. They're actually thinking of it way ahead of the curve, because they know that once we tap into this virtual world, it's going to totally change the way we transact. See, up until now, we've got the internet, sit in front of a screen, scroll a few pages, do certain things. But the next generation will be what you see in the movies, which will be a holographic image where you can literally walk into just your lounge and you could be in a burger place, you could be in a cinema, in a retail place, literally any of those, but you're still in your living room. That doesn't mean you're going to spend your life sitting in your living room. This is just different ways of doing things, and you can't sort of like get into somewhere without paying. So there's no creeping in through the back door to go and watch a film, because you can't do that in the metaverse, which is good fun when you try it. You can't steal virtual products either. So again, if you haven't paid for it, it doesn't exist. So you can run wherever you like. This is the power of what Hyphenation is bringing. And guess what? Lots of people will not see it at all. They just won't get it. And they will, make all sorts of claims that, oh, this is rubbish, it's never going to work. But when you sort of like look into this, you realize that it's a much bigger market. And this is where, when you look at what hedge funds have done, and when we go back to the Evergrande story, right, what this new universe is going to show us is how we can transact without all of this, unscrupulous ways of, buying property and renting it out, and no proper ways of running investments. You could do crowdfunding, mortgages, loans. All of this can be done in the metaverse. So it's just a whole crazy new world. And, it's a hard one to get your head around. So it takes time to understand it and to really grasp it. But when you start digging, anything you don't understand, just ask. Just ask, or go on YouTube and, watch as many videos as you can until some of it sinks in. And then when you're lost for that little piece that doesn't sink in, come in the group and ask somebody. Because guess what? Somebody will have made it sink in. And once they tell you, then you'll be ahead of the curve. So it almost, it looks as if like, there's a chaos around the world, and there's, all these things happening. But just think, if you're a yellow box holder and there's enough good people who will, even forget buying a planet, even buy a big chunk of land, and suddenly, say, right, okay, everybody that follows me, you can have a piece of land for $5. Believe me, Snoop Dogg bought a piece of land, virtual land, and the land next to him went for $500,000. So believe me, $4 or $5 is peanuts. But guess what? That also helps the people who sold the land in the first place. Because here's what happens, and this is the beauty of NFTs and selling land. So let's say me, Bernie, and Dee decide to buy a piece of land, and we give everybody the option to buy land at $5. In that NFT code for all those parcels of land, we put into the code that we get 5% of every transaction. So suddenly, if you buy it for $5 and you sell it for $100, we're going to get 5% of that. And then for that $100, somebody sells it for $1,000, we'll get 5% of that too. So this is where not only can people win, but even the pioneers can win too. So it literally is a hand-in-hand situation. And this is what the metaverse is teaching us. And guess what? Most companies and governments know that this is the future. Because guess what? When we find out we can do all of this, who's going to be bothered with everything else that's going on in the world? We'll be like, no, forget that. I'm doing really well out of this. So let me just stop the recording. I'm going to stop the recording here. So thanks for listening to this. Hopefully it gives you a bit more idea of everything that's going on. And we do the same call again on Thursday.